Agenda item this afternoon is agenda item number 11, and we're going to have an update on dyslexia training and timeline. And Brad Neuenswanger is here to join us, and I think Cindy Haddocky is probably here also. Yeah, Cindy's here too. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the board. Yes, Cindy is social distancing appropriately. So we just wanted to give you an update on where we were as a state on dyslexia and some recommended timelines for moving forward over the next really year. So in 2019, November 2019, the board approved really 4 areas of recommendations for dyslexia. There were the pre-service recommendations for higher ed. There was evidence-based reading practices, the screening process for students, recommendations on that, and then just the overall professional learning recommendations that the board approved in 2019. And I just kind of want to walk through these. As far as the pre-service recommendations, all of that is moving forward. Colleges of education have until August of 21, so another year from now, to change the standards and programs staffed and prepared for delivery by August of 2023, and we believe that's still on track. Matter of fact, you know, they're progressing very well with that. Cindy has been working with them and giving them any guidance that they need. And then candidates for K-6 teaching licenses, ELA endorsements, reading specialist, special education are to pass an exam of their knowledge of the science of reading. This goes into effect next August of 2021, and we believe that timeline is also still on track. So really no recommendations to change the pre-service. The other 3 areas that we're in, that the board approved, that we would recommend new timelines. Obviously, the one reason that's causing a lot of this is there was the goal of timeline to have a dyslexia funded position by July of 2020. So just this past summer, that did not happen. So we would recommend moving that as the board last month, I believe. I don't even have my years right sometimes, but in your budget, you recommended to the legislature funding for a dyslexia position, so we would recommend just moving that timeline to July of 21. The professional learning requirements, these were the requirements that we had in place for school districts to receive all the trainings this year. We would recommend moving those requirements to the end of the 2021 school year rather than the beginning of the 2021 school year. The 21 school year. The universal screenings, again, for school districts, moved to the beginning of the 2022 school year rather than the 21 school year. So just basically giving districts an additional year for that. The tiered systems of support, move that to the beginning of 2022 rather than the beginning of 21. And then the evidence-based literacy, which is chosen as structured literacy, moved to the beginning of the 2022 school year rather than the 21 school year. As well as the dyslexia handbook, moving that from July of 20 to July of 21. Even though we are well on our way of developing that, we would just move that requirement. The supports that school districts would still receive this year is, well, not only we can still provide a lot of guidance, continue to provide guidance to our teacher prep programs on the standards. Trainings to educators on early literacy from the service centers and our TASN providers, those are all still available. So if we have school districts that still want supports during this school year, those are accessible with all the trainings that Cindy and her group led last year, the trainer of trainers. School districts still have access to trainings throughout the school year. And while timelines are moved back 1 year, professional development supports to the field are, like I said, still available throughout this school year. So those are the recommended timelines that we would want the board to consider.
Randy's got some comments.
As Brad said, we don't like moving this back, but the reason that it needs to be moved back is the legislature was preempted, and while we think that they probably would have funded the money for this position, there was some widespread support of that. They didn't get around to doing that, and so we just don't have the money to carry this out for this year.
Okay, we do have some questions. Jim Porter?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow up on what Randy said. We did testify in favor of the Legislative Task Force on Dyslexia recommended that position be funded by the legislature. It was a unanimous decision. Several members of that task force did testify before the Senate Education Budget Committee. It was widely supported. It was Senator Masterson and Senator Givens, who is no longer going to be a senator, but he is on the task force as a special ed administrator, so he'll still be on the task force as a special ed administrator. That was on the fast track to be approved, and then they had that one-day meeting where they just didn't get put in. So I have confidence that under the circumstances, that wouldn't have had any trouble. The chair of that committee and other members of that committee that supported that, however, were defeated in their primary election. So I don't know if that's going to create another issue. And the person that initially introduced the dyslexia bill before it was modified ran for Senate from the House and was defeated. So some of the legislative supporters. So we have work to do. It's not guaranteed. There is widespread support, so I'm confident that that'll be addressed positively again, but it isn't a given. Question for Cindy, if that's okay. Can you kind of tell us about how, the numbers of people that have been trained, sort of what has happened so far as training?
Yeah, I certainly can. Thank you for having me here today. Currently, I am hosting trainings once a month virtually for districts who either don't have access to a service center or currently don't have the funds for that. It's a free training, and I've been able to train myself and with a colleague upstairs about 4,000 or 5,000 teachers since March. I mean, it's just been overwhelmingly popular. Service centers are still doing some of the training. They have different needs now, obviously based on the situation with our health emergency. So,
okay, thank you. And to bring the board up to date, we have the Legislative Task Force is made up of some pretty powerful advocates, so my plan. And one of the reasons that I requested with the chair not to vote on this today is to give me time to communicate where we are with the members of the Legislative Task Force on dyslexia. Our consultant or our research person is changing, so I asked for. I depend on staff over there just like we depend on Peggy, so I didn't even have the contact information for the members of that committee, but I got them yesterday. And I visited with David Herford, who's the professor at the nationally recognized professor on structured literacy from Pitt State University, and we had a conversation yesterday, and he's going to help me put together communication to the task force. He's a member of the task force and one of the subcommittee chairs. So it's understandable you can't screen people that aren't there because they're at home. You can't, this is all logical, but it's going to be hard for some of the members who have been fighting for 25 years and thought they'd won to accept this. So we're going to try to be careful to make sure that we are completely transparent and that we have communicated well with them before we take any final action. And there may be feedback from that group that we'll need to hear before we take final action, even though it's logical. We're all in a different world. You can't train people that aren't there. You can't screen people that aren't there. And I would hope that we would still encourage, because other agencies are providing training, that we, even though the bottom line, we may push back a year the requirements. If you'll recall, whenever we approved the timeline to start with, part of the motion was that if it could be done faster than that, we wanted it done faster than that. And I would hope that we can still encourage people to continue training, to continue learning the process, to continue implementing prior to the deadline, if at all possible, with the understanding that we are not in a normal situation and have to be cognizant of that. That's a lot of words to say not much, but I'm most concerned with making sure that we keep the legislative task force on dyslexia involved and are transparent with them so that we can keep that momentum going, because it was almost a miracle that we all agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. And just a reminder to the board, we've moved this particular item from an information only to a receive item. And one of the reasons was to give Mr. Porter an opportunity to meet with his legislative task force to let them know what's going on. So you just heard a good explanation of that. We've got a couple of other questions. Ben Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick clarification. When we're talking about the 2021 school year, that's the current year, correct?
Yeah, so the 2021, so if we say 2020, that's this school year. 21
So
school.
it's the year that the district starts, when school
Correct,
starts, not ends?
correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page, because it gets confusing when the year starts halfway through the year. On that. And the question, it might be for you, it might be for Randy. What happens in the event that the legislature doesn't fund it? And maybe Jim can answer that, or we don't know what the answer to it is until the legislature comes back. Or the new legislature comes in, I should say, not comes back, when the new legislature. Can we do this work, or is this completely hinge on them acting?
So, as Jim knows, this was a partnership between the state board and legislators and passionate people who felt like this wasn't being addressed. I think we have done all the work to get ready. Now we need the legislature to appropriate the money to do it. That was the partnership. Without that, we're in a budget hold to budget cut stage because of the economy, and so we just don't have the funds to do it. We're prepared to do it. Cindy's chomping at the bit to do it. We want her to do it, but we don't have the funds to do it. This is no fault of the legislature, they had to leave town.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for them to appropriate the money.
Yeah,
to do it.
I'm just thinking from a square one, not policy mindset, but just doability. I mean, if it just hinges on that position to go forward, I mean, we just
And let me follow up.
other avenues to look at throughout this year.
Also, the members of the task force are influential and politically active, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to them is to make sure they don't go off in 17 different directions, that we have a coordinated approach to the legislature, because they can be influential and powerful, and we need to keep that going in the right direction, and I'm sure that they're going to be very willing and enthusiastic partners.
I appreciate it, and that's just a concern that I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Jim McNeese?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to kind of build on what Jim was saying and Cindy and the training. When this was all starting, I was in Orion, Clearwater, and they had I don't want to call it a training necessarily, but an awareness for the administrators and the service center. And they did a simulation. And once you do that simulation, there's no question about what dyslexia, what the barriers are, but also the need to change points of view. And I was, at that time, very impressed with where they did it and how I felt at the end of it, but how it impacted the administrators who were there. Excuse me, because even in our field, there are those who are less enthusiastic possibly about, the need for this. But once they do that simulation and get that background information and early training, boy, it just changes your whole perspective, and it was a very powerful experience that day. And then we got bummed out with the rest of the COVID-19 thing. So yes, this is very much needed, and I see the administrators supporting it as they learn more about it, and that's a key to it happening as well. So we need to make sure we continue to push this and make sure that it comes to fruition, as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I know, I don't know, last summer or the summer before, I think I took one of Cindy's trainings on the science of reading, and it's very good and very well received throughout the state. So it's not that there is an interest, it's not that there isn't desire. It's just, multiple confluences have happened at the same time that are kind of interrupting that, and there's certainly desire. So what we want to do as a state board is give Mr. Porter an opportunity to get with this task force, let them know what's going on, and then we will bring this back in probably September, but we'll see for sure, but probably September. And Brad's got some more comments.
Yeah, well, if I may, I just can't thank Cindy enough for the incredible work that she picked up and led through all last year, and none of this is in her job description. I mean, she is, which means she hasn't been able to focus on her real job description, which is our elementary consultant. And she will still be able to lead early literacy, but her role, none of this was in her job description, but she did an amazing job and can continue to support. But this can give some relief and allow her to support school districts in all standards and content in elementary and navigating change. And so, but she's done an amazing job with this.
Okay, well, we will, probably Mr. Porter will let us know, but I would guess hopefully by the September meeting, you'll have some feedback from your task force group, and we'll be able to have this back on the agenda in September for a vote. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. Brad, thank you, and Cindy, thank you for your ongoing work with this too. Okay, now we're going to move to item number 12, which is this is a receive item, higher education preparation program standards for the reading specialist. And looks like Catherine's here and some folks online too, so welcome to our folks online also.
All right. See if I can make the Zoom work properly.
Okay, you've got some help coming here.
Yay. Yep, they're both up. And share screen. And click both.
And then you should be able to start your presentation.
I don't think she's sharing that. I think
It is.
she didn't share that document.
Oh, wait, is it not?
There we go.
There we go.
Okay,
I don't think she's sharing that though. I think, well, maybe.
Yeah, it should.
Okay, we think we've got our program shared. So Catherine, and you've got some folks online that you're going to introduce also.
I do, yes.
Okay, very good, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for receiving me this afternoon. I am Catherine Schmidling. I am Teacher Licensure and Accreditation's Program Consultant for Higher Ed. And I am here to present you with the most recent set of higher ed program standards that have been revised for your consideration. Just as a reminder, all of the program standards are in the process of being revised. And they are for use by the colleges and universities that prepare teachers. So these are the standards that the teachers are prepared to. The colleges use these standards to design new programs and also to monitor and redesign existing programs. Sorry, it's too short. There we go. And the Licensure Review Committee also uses these standards to look at out-of-state licenses that when it's not clear if they align to the endorsement, they'll use these standards to gauge that. As a reminder, there are two types of preparation program standards: the professional ed standards, which you reviewed and approved in 2015. And those apply across every license and endorsement area. They are the general knowledge and skills that any teacher should know and be able to do. And what you've been looking at since then are the content program standards for each individual license and endorsement area. So I am going to turn it over now to Drs. Kathy Sanders and Carrie Tolstrup from Fort Hays State University, who led the committee to revise the reading specialist standards to make sure they are updated for the field and aligned for the International Dyslexia Association standards. And hopefully they can hear me.
Yes, there we go. Can you hear us?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Kathleen Sanders. Hello to those of you I know. I appreciate having the opportunity to visit with you again. I chaired the Reading Specialist Program. For your information, the Reading Specialist Program is a graduate level standard program. These are students who will be getting their master's degrees. So they've already have a teaching license in whatever area that they have chosen during their undergraduate experiences. The Reading Specialist Program is aligned with and approved by the International Literacy Association, or ILA, which is on this particular slide, I think. Have we lost the slide? Do you have the papers in front of you, perhaps?
Well, we're still working through a little technology here on our end, so we're trying to get you guys up on the slide and the.
Trying to get us all together, huh?
Yeah, so okay. Now, can you see that?
There we go.
I can see you folks and I can see the slide. Is
Okay.
that what I need to see?
Yep, we're good, so go ahead,
We're
please.
good, okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Any rate, there aligned, the Reading Specialist is approved by the International Literacy Association. And this organization approves programs all over the United States. So whether the students are from the state of Kansas, are candidates from the state of Kansas, or there are candidates from other states, or internationally, which we do have several of those, this is the policy that they follow. Very, very luckily for us, the International Dyslexia Association standards for reading aligned absolutely perfectly with the International Literacy Association. The dyslexia, or the IDA standards, have very specific subcategories, and we were able, we had a wonderful group of teachers and higher ed, so we had a number of people that had been on the dyslexia task force that were in our committee, and we were just thrilled, which is probably why we are the first to be able to present ours, because ours was one of the most easiest to align. With the IDA standards, we were able to include all, let me emphasize that again, all of the subcategories and standards in each one of the 7 standards that are part of the International Literacy Association standards. The titles on the ILA standards are very generic, and the titles in the IDA standards are only 2 or 3 words. And so we use the ILA, since that was a complete sentence and a little bit longer in breadth. But the standards all align, so we were able to include both of them, mesh them together, and have all of the wording from the ILA standards and from the IDA standards in one document for your review. We also created, or the ILA had added, a new standard that regards clinical experiences, and we were very pleased because the IDA standards heavily indicates the application of the IDA standards and the subcategories and the requirements for IDA. And so all of those would be included in the clinical experiences, which then really guarantees that the IDA standards will be part of their clinical experiences. I'm not sure what else you would like to know. I think maybe I would like to answer questions more than anything else, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Board members, just for your reference, the actual standards in your agenda start on page 95. There's a crosswalk there first, and then the information is behind that. So this is a receive item this time. Do you have questions for any of our presenters? Okay, Mr. Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we look to the future and redesign schools, can you address what I've tried to bring to this board for 7 years, that not every teacher needs to go to Teachers College? Can you speak to that, please?
I'm not sure I would be able to, since my background is in teacher colleges. I'm not sure what you're asking, I'm sorry.
Permit me to elaborate. One of my talking points has developed over many, many years is along the lines of technical courses in secondary school especially. I mean, who do you want teaching that welding class? Someone who knows how to weld or someone who's been to Teachers College? And it seems to me that there's a bias, a great bias, that anyone who wants to teach a welding class needs to be instructed in pedagogical instruction first and foremost before they actually impart their love of welding or their expertise in that particular craft. And lately I've been asking, who do you want teaching Mandarin? Someone who knows Mandarin and English, or someone who's been to Teachers College? So with an eye on secondary courses especially, would you agree that at least in some areas there are instructional opportunities for people who do not have teacher training?
With your examples of welding and different languages, with special regard to that, I would have to agree with that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And there are current licensure opportunities, and I'll ask.
Absolutely, we do have alternative programs.
Yeah.
And a couple of universities have alternative programs. I know with elementary, we have several institutions that have an alternate route to an elementary license that does not have the 4-year program. It does require a degree. in a particular area, but the pedagogy is usually just only part of the master's program. I'm not positive, other than that, what to say. I'm sorry, Catherine, you might have something more to say.
I have a question with the IDA and ILA. Can you kind of look into the standards and kind of give us an example of how those two particular organizations, how that was able to kind of come
Sure, I
together?
can, and tell you how it will be presented. I'm not too sure what page it has Kansas licensure standards for the reading specialist educators. You might,
Well, if you tell us the standard you're referencing, I
okay,
think we can.
standard one, I can start with standard one.
Okay,
Standard one deals with the demonstration of knowledge of major theoretical, conceptual, historical, and evidence-based foundations of literacy and languages, the ways in which they interrelate, and the role of reading literacy specialists in schools. This is taken from the ILA Standard 1 and the IDA Standard 1. Both of them, this is their wording for that. In the functions under that, the first function that there is talking about evidence-based components such as concept of print, phonological awareness, phonics, et cetera, that is taken from ILA Standard 1, subcategory 1. If you drop down to the first four are the ILA standard subcategories. If you jump down to function 1.5, 1.5 reads, candidates understand the 5 language processing requirements of proficient reading and writing, phonological, orthographic, semantic, syntactic, and discourse. That is directly from the IDA, or the Dyslexia Standards 1.1. And functions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 are all from the IDA standards. And that's the format for the rest of the standards. Where this becomes vitally important is when you are asking a candidate, do you as a candidate, can we state categorically that you understand all of the components of Standard 1? The way that we would make sure that they did is usually through a rubric, and the rubric would include all of these wordings. And so if a student was very good in, say, phonics, but not very good in phonemic awareness, we would know that immediately through the rubric, and then be able to intentionally provide an intervention for our candidates for more information on phonemic awareness, for instance.
okay.
Did that help?
Yeah, thank you. That certainly clarifies it for me. We do have another question from another board member, Ann Ma.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I got my question answered, but, to Steve's point, the welding thing is a perfect example of where we do have teachers in schools who have not been to teacher. I mean, we have lots of ways for those folks to come in. They're all over the state right now. So that particular talking point has always puzzled me because it's just not so. In fact, we're going to approve some folks today as visiting scholars who don't have the pedagogy but have the expertise to be in the classroom, and we're going to vote to allow them in. So we let folks in to teach kids all the time who haven't been to teachers' college.
Right, if I might, and it's the perspective of, maybe it's historical within the world of education. It's an alternative. It's an alternative to the real McCoy, and we have to get past that. There are really great teachers out there who are farmers and ranchers and doctors and dentists, and we need to welcome them without saying, oh, okay, you're really an alternative to the real McCoy.
Okay, I don't want to get in a discussion about this right now when we're talking about dyslexia. or we're talking about reading, the reading specialist. But we do have a lot of alternatives. But any other questions about the reading specialist item? Because this will be back next month for a vote. And then your organizations, your colleges and universities, what's your implementation timeline?
Once you have approved these, and as a matter of fact, I know that we are, and I have talked to several others on the committee who are already beginning to implement these in classes. So I'm anticipating that by the end of the 2021 school year, that these will be implemented so that people that are, or institutions that are seeking accreditation beginning in 2021 will actually have these standards ready to go for the reading specialist. Now, I know that the state probably has a little delay tactic in there, that there'll be a time period when both the older standards and these newer standards can be part of the accreditation process. But the reading specialist group that we worked with were very anxious to get started on this, and we're very pleased to have this document that we can begin working on right now.
Well, it sounds like those two association standards really did mesh well together, so thank you very much.
Yes, they did.
Thank you very much for your work, and we'll be back with this item next month as an
And I will see you
approval.
then, and thank you very much for your time and your consideration.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Kathy. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Watson?
There's been a lot of great work around this, and you've acknowledged that. I want to give Jim Porter a lot of credit, and there's a young lady I'm looking over at Michelle that knows a lot about reading specialists. For years, we debated the best ways in which to read. You can go all the way Why Johnny Can't Read, which is the 1950s some book. And to watch the two organizations that Catherine had up on the screen come to agreement on the science was an earth-shattering moment. There is no longer a dispute on the science of how to teach people to read. And getting reading specialists and everyone trained is going to be such a big lift. Jim, just thank you for your work on that. But that was not always the case, as the people were split on the science, and that's no longer the case.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Watson. Appreciate that. Okay, thank you, Catherine. Okay, our next item, item 13, is a quarterly update on the work of the Special Education Advisory Council. And Bert Moore is here, and I believe we'll have Heath Piney on Zoom also. So you may be working to get that up to speed. So, okay, we are on page 113 on your agenda. I don't think there's any coordinating information here, so. We have our Zoom person on.
Yes, he is.
Okay, yep, there he is. Just a second, Heath, we're trying to get everything put up on screen. Okay, all right, looks like we're good. Okay, welcome, Bert.
Thank you. We really appreciate this opportunity, Madam Chair and State Board, to provide you an update of the Special Advisory Council. I thought you might want to hear it from the chair of the council, and that's why Heath Piney's been invited to share this PowerPoint. I will also be available for questions and to interject on some of the slides. So Heath, go ahead.
Welcome,
Afternoon, Madam Chairperson and the rest of the board. It's a pleasure to present to you today. I do want to say that I can just barely hear you, so you might have to wave or something if you need me, or Bert needs me to do something else.
Okay, is that better? Can you hear
Heard
that?
you a little bit there.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Some of it may be on my end. As Bert mentioned, I'm the chair of the Special Education Advisory Council this year. On our first meeting, we had the agenda items that you can see up on the screen, and we like to start out each meeting of the year with an orientation, as we typically have several members that transition in and out, and it gives a good idea to the members of what our mission is, what our vision is, what we're trying to accomplish, and what we're there for. We also get an overview of Robert's rules, just to help those that may not get to do those fun things very often. So that was our first topic on the agenda. Next, we had a discussion over an ex officio position, as KNEA had requested to become an ex officio position. The current KNEA president, Sherry Schwantz, was there in attendance. She gave a presentation. She had the discussion with us. We discussed it, had some consideration, and a motion to approve an addition did not pass. The following two items on the agenda will be explained further in the next slides. Bert, if you could go to the next slide, please. We also had a lengthy discussion on transition planning. This document came from the subcommittee of the Transition Task Force for consideration, and we discussed it at length, and along with the subcommittee who'd worked on some of the implementation with the board earlier this year, reformed it, and we'll be meeting soon to continue the work. But we also have some information about NTACT, and I'd like Bert to jump in and explain some of that.
Thank you, Heath. The National Technical Assistance Center on Transition is a group that we started to participate in conference with back in, it was December or January. We went to Anaheim. We took Beth Van Vleck with us from VR, who works with Priets. And from that meeting, we came back and we formed our local group to come up with our planning document for the upcoming years. So this is a multi-year plan. And from the planning that we did, we came up with these two targeted goals. One is to create the interagency coordinating body development and to continue to work with agencies to provide support for the field, for parents, for students who are transitioning. And we accomplished some of that with the August 5th transition Zoom, which included several of our key players in the state that assist us with transition. That included Families Together, VR Priets, and Nancy Scott, who helped us with health planning and work for students who have significant disabilities, but parents feel like they'll lose their benefits if they go to work. And so they have planning that they can do with parents that say work is the first consideration. And then we want to increase the transition education and service data system so we can collect what's going on in the state and create a service map. So those are our two primary targets. And then on August the 5th, we were announcing that we would have this Zoom. Well, we had over 168 people participate. It was well received. I believe Dina attended. She was on there the entire time from what I could tell. And it was a well planned and well thought out process. We got lots of good feedback from the August the 5th transition Zoom. That's also posted. You see that link up there for secondary transition, KSDE webpage. That entire webinar is posted there. Okay, Heath.
Go ahead, Heath.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. We also discussed the Navigating Change document, and the Special Education Legal and Fiscal Frequently Asked Questions documents. We put this on the agenda in advance, knowing that there would be a lot of questions before this even came out, when it came up, as how we can support the needs of special education in the state. And we did have a really good discussion, and it's very complicated to try to understand how to make IDEA work in an environment that we've never experienced before and that it wasn't written for. There's been a lot of work by many people trying to figure out how to best do that in practice. And I do want to commend Bert and the KSDE team for the multiple methods they've done to try to help us beyond just the documents that are on here. They've also put into place some open meetings for us to have discussions and collaboration and work together, which I think has been very helpful trying to figure out how to support students with disabilities. Next slide. We also had an announcement that once again, KSDE, the state of Kansas, has received the symbol of meets requirements from the federal office for 2020. This is something that not every state receives, and I might be off, but I think maybe only half the states seem to receive it, but Kansas has received it for the last several years. And I think that's very exciting that the special education in Kansas has done a wonderful job at following what we need to follow under IDEA and making advancements and improvements as we go along the way. Next slide, please. We finished the meeting with council member reports. The organizations that you see on your slide all gave a report to talk about how they have been supporting their organizations and the challenges and successes they found during COVID-19. And that was an excellent discussion to have from very different groups and different perspectives on how we can provide support. Next slide, please. You guys have any questions?
Okay, board members, questions? I'm particularly interested in the transition piece, and I know we've got I think a task force or a work group working on that.
Yes.
Maybe if we could share a little bit more information kind of on what's going on there and kind of timeline, what's the direction and how you're proceeding with that.
Okay. You want me to answer that, Heath?
Go for it, yeah.
All right. So what we've been doing is working on a process of facilitation with Intact, and James Sinclair, who is a independent person who Intact employs, has agreed to work with us as a work group, and that includes Leah Holly from Families Together and Beth Van Vleck from VR, as well as Wendy Coates, Stacy Martin, and Dean Zykes. And what we're doing is then we're mapping out a plan for forming a transition council again in the state of Kansas. We're also working on a document that the task force had put together that they wanted parents to have. And we have found some really valuable resources for parents that Families Together already has taken care of and put together. And we want people to have access to those. So one of the most important things we've done is we formed a transition website. We now have the page. People can go there, they can get the resources, they can get recordings of our webinars, and we have a listserv. So we're asking people to contact us to get their name on the listserv. And then as we send things out on transition, then anyone on the listserv is going to receive those, and we'll also post them on our website. So those are our biggest items right now, Madam Chair, is trying to get information out to the field and be consistent in our messaging and make sure that those teachers, especially when we have so many new teachers coming to secondary education, a lot of substitutes, that they understand the requirements of transition and they're able to work with parents and families in a collaborative manner and explaining what is available for students beginning at age 14.
As I kind of remember some conversation, I think maybe Mr. Porter was involved in this conversation about looking for other, maybe more meaningful job opportunities for some of our students as they transition out of the traditional high school, or maybe even transition out of the program when they age out of the program that goes to 21. Are you working at all with the Department of Labor, or is there a thought about working with the Department of Labor in the future as far as looking at, opportunities that might be good for students that maybe would be, for some of them, beyond the sheltered workshop that a number of them are participating in?
Absolutely. We're looking at all of the agencies that provide supports to families and to students as they graduate from high school and move through. We want to make sure that all the adult service providers that have the opportunity to provide support to students who are ready to transition but still need support will have access to those adult services, and that includes the Department of Labor. So we're trying to make this very broad. We went to look at how many agencies are out there that can provide supports to our students, and we found 15 pages. So that's one of the things that we're also looking at, is trying to get some sort of a webinar set up or a Zoom collection of data from these agencies where we have 7 questions that we ask, and then we can post that on our website, such as what age students do you serve, what services do you provide, how do people get referrals to your agency, what areas of the state are you serving, those sorts of questions, so that we'll have a lot of opportunity for families to go and say, okay, I didn't know that that agency existed in my region, and then they can access support. This is going to be very comprehensive.
Yeah, I think that'd be real helpful for folks, so. Board members, other questions? Okay, doesn't look like we've got any more questions at this time. Heath, thank you very much for joining us via Zoom. Appreciate
you.
that. And Bert, I think you're up for the next one because we have an action item on some new appointments to SEAC. And this, board members, I believe, if you're wanting to follow along, these come up on page 115, so. Bert?
Okay, Heath, did you want to speak to this, or would you rather I do it?
I can start, Bert, and then you can follow up with anything that I miss.
Okay.
We at SEAC, our membership is dictated through the IDEA law as well as Kansas state law. And we have several requirements that we have to meet as to whom are the right people to be on the board. And it's looking for a diverse background, a diverse understanding of how to help students with special education, students with disabilities. And that membership has to meet a majority requirement where the majority of the members are either a person with a disability or the parent of a person with a disability. It's a 3-year term that may continue to a second term. And we also try to get representation from around the states. Next slide, please. What we did this time is how the process worked is that nomination emails went out through multiple sources and came in. And then Mr. Moore put together a panel to look at those, which included the past chair, current chair, and chair-elect, as well as some of the team members from KSDE to review those. And really, when we go through and review them, we had to find the ones that met the statute, that met the components that we were missing, which narrowed it down very quickly. And we had to send out a new set of nominations because we were unable to find 2 different positions. And those 2 positions were the positions of a state adult correction agency was one. And let's see, those are the 2 positions right there. They weren't the only necessarily 2 we received. I think there was a 3rd in there, but they did seem to be very high quality applicants for this, high quality nominations. It is a challenge to get somebody to fill all the different range of positions that we need to have, and we're excited to have some that came to us very highly recommended. Bert, is there anything I need to add or you need to add?
No, Heath, I think you did a good job. I think the majority is a consideration, also ensuring that all of the 21 members meet the requirement for the specific population they represent. And you'll notice that the representation from a state education official, not necessarily an employee, but an official from a state education agency, was one consideration. The other was someone who worked in state adult corrections. And we had to be very secure in knowing that these individuals met that requirement. We had very few applicants, by the way. We had a handful of applicants. these were the two that the panel of chair, past chair, and chair-elect felt met the requirement. And that would include Tobias Wood, and he would represent the state education official from the Kansas Board of Regents, and Brandon Gay, who represents state adult correction agencies. And then it just so happens which region they represent, but those were the two that met the requirement, because we were concerned that we might not have any applicants that met the requirement.
Okay, very good. Question or comment, I'm not sure which, but Ben Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm having some issues with the Board of Regents position. There's already 2 members from a Regents institution on there, and this would be a third. Now, I know they're not from the agency itself, but you have somebody from Wichita State and UKU on there, as I recall when I looked at the list.
I don't recall. Are they on there? Okay.
And so that would be a third regent, but we don't have anybody from private institutions on there, which there's a lot of private colleges that prepare SPED teachers as well. But and this is part of the conversations I've had with John as a liaison in the School for the Blind. He has a concern about not having representation from that school since they split leadership in the reorganization of the schools recently. That just one of the schools has representation now, and the leadership's not getting shared on SEAC. And it's just something I brought up before. So it's not anything new. So it's just a reiteration as a liaison in the School for the Blind and conversations I've had with John and relaying that message to my board mates and also to you in that regard. So I have hesitation. It has nothing to do with the person individually. I don't know the person. It's not a personality thing. It's just that diversity and I don't know how you define state education official, and maybe Mark has an answer for that. But what fulfills that position, or what the definition is of that position? So.
And we took quite some time to figure that out, and it had to be someone who worked for a state agency and represented that state agency. And Tobias has a background in career technical education at the Kansas Board of Regents. He's the associate director, so he has that CTE background as well. So I think he came through as a strong candidate because he also had that background for what we're looking for in that Perkins and career technical education.
Okay. Which is good, because that stuff wasn't reflected in our documentation.
Well,
like other nominees, usually we have the application with it, and it just said he's from the Board of Regents, and
sorry about that.
And so we don't know his background. He just has the agency, and so knowing that, that's just one of the concerns. I want to relay that concern again, and I know a lot of it's constricted as to what we can have on there, but I wanted to relay that just from my position and what I work in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Jim Porter?
Are you ready for a motion?
Yes, sir.
I move that the Kansas State Board of Education act to appoint 2 new members to the Special Education Advisory Council with their terms of service from date of appointment through June 30th, 2023.
Okay, we have a motion for the action. Do we have a second? Jim McNeese. Any further questions or comments? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Okay, that's 8-1. Ben Jones in opposition. Thank you both.
you.
Heath, again, thank you. Appreciate you all being here today and joining us. We are running way ahead. I don't know if Michelle is in here or if she's listening, because the act on the new appointment to the License Review Committee, if she... I know there's a break, but I'm thinking this one won't take long, and then I thought maybe we'd take a break.
I'll be happy to make the motion without her.
Well, it is to act on a new appointment to the License Review Committee, so we might at least, I'm probably guessing she's headed this way, and I'll get to the right page so you can look at it. Page 121, and then the actual license information starts on 122. I heard the door, maybe she's coming. Maybe not. Yes, she will be. So it will be licensure review committee, and looks like to me there was basically one recommendation. I'm stalling if you can't tell. Oh, there she is, hooray! Sorry to throw you for a loop there, Michelle, we were running a little ahead.
That's okay. We listened for this very reason, but I was with Mr. Gordon, so I apologize.
That's quite all right, quite all right.
Yeah, thank you.
We thought you might be out of breath, but we're looking at the new appointment to the licensure review committee, and looks like to me we have one recommendation.
That is
So,
correct. Thank you.
If you've caught your breath, otherwise I can talk for a little bit if you need me to.
No, I think I'm okay. Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner Watson, thank you. I am here to bring you this recommendation of Mr. Cody Calkins, Lakin Middle School. This is a super opportunity for us to add someone to licensure review committee from the western half of our state. So he was the nominee that met the qualifications, and he is before you for your approval.
As you can see, this is not a big committee.
Yeah.
It's a fairly small committee, but like you say, it's nice to add somebody. It's a administrator building level. So do we have, Jean Clifford, do you want to make the motion?
Yes.
So moved, huh?
Yes, so moved. I'd be happy to do so.
Okay, so what she said was it is moved that the Kansas State Board of Education act to appoint Cody Calkins to his first term on the Licensure Review Committee, effective from the date of appointment to June 30th of 2023. And I think, okay, Ben Jones has a second. Okay, questions or comments? Okay. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like a 9-0. Michelle, thank you.
You're welcome. I can move forward if you're, because I think I'm not far behind that item.
No, we're gonna do the break now.
Okay,
So,
all right. Thought maybe I should stick around.
Yeah, and why don't we let's take a 15-minute break, since we've got a little time. So, let's be back at 10 till, please. Thank you.
I'm just glad no one was watching as I ran down the hall.
Well, 5 minutes anyway. I don't know if that's extended, but. Okay, our next agenda item is item 16, and this is a receive item, and we're going to receive some recommendations and a report from the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee on the limited apprentice license, and there's information if you're looking in your agenda and you want to look at that, page 129 and 130. And Michelle is, after I made her run down the hall, she's
I'm back.
here with her breath caught.
This time I'm not, yeah, so all is well. Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner Watson, thank you. So this is exciting to me to bring you the recommendations and the report from the limited apprentice license. The pilot that, there were two that you all supported, and as all good pilots have to come to an end, this one came to an end. Due to the COVID outbreak, we did extend it for this past summer cohort, but it is not in play for this fall. So I'm happy to be here today to answer questions for you, let you see a little bit of the evaluative process we went through to bring you the recommendation and to thank you for supporting this as well. Just as a reminder, okay, tech people, there we go. The pilot design we launched in 18-19. There were two pathways. You had the high incidence special ed para, which was for para experience, which was for paraprofessionals with bachelor's degrees. And then we also had the elementary pilot. Both of those candidates, the gatekeeper was a bachelor's degree. The district would identify a super duper candidate for these positions, and the university provided a 2-year plan of study. And they were able to get the licenses at different times. There were different qualifications for each one of the pilot opportunities. And the mentor assigned, the collaborative support between the system, the university, and the candidate were highlights of this particular pilot. You've seen this before. I think we were here in May and we brought this to you. The districts who participated were spread all out throughout the state, which is good. You can see some places where there was not as much participation and places where there was anywhere from 1 to 24 participants. Here's the May reference that I made to you all. In May, when we pulled our count, which did not take into consideration that summer cohort, okay? So in May, we had 269 in the high incidence special ed pilot, and we had 55 in the elementary pilot. You all graciously allowed us to continue that for a summer cohort, which I have to tell you was most beneficial to the special ed side, not on the elementary pilot side, but that gave the special education candidates a chance to get their 6 to 9 hours over the summer so that they could work this fall. We were lucky enough to do some work with Dr. Amy Gomer Erickson from the University of Kansas. She's phenomenal, by the way. I would give her public kudos. She was able to contact 188 individuals who were teacher of record in the fall of 2019. She started the evaluation with the previous cohort, not this last couple of semesters. So she had 142 responses. She contacted the program university, the local education association coordinator, and had tremendous response to the survey. And for that, I would like to thank all of the folks who responded and the work that the KU, the university, the Center of Research and Learning did for us. Fort Hays, these are the list of universities who had candidates that were participating. Coursework per semester was about what those candidates went through there, about 6 hours. 70% of the, and again, I don't want to read all of this to you, but I just want you to rest assured that her research of the participants, the universities, and the local education agencies was, it was a phenomenal set of feedback, and I'm happy to share the full report if any of you would like to have that for your nighttime reading. Here are some other evaluation, some pieces that are, I appreciate that she asked about their work and life home balances. We did hear from candidates that this is intense programming, right? It's a lot in a short amount of time in a program that reaches our most sometimes difficult to teach kiddos. So they had a lot on their plate. High percentage of respondents reporting that they'd chosen the right career. These were the paras, remember. The paras were involved in this and had said, I'm in the right space. So from the administrators, this is what we heard. Absolutely should continue with no changes. Some improved communication, that never hurts in anything. Helpful for career advancement, and we had 61 administrators from that map that I showed you earlier who were able to respond. From the university advisory folks, their report, the thing that I think thrilled me the most was they reported that these candidates will be effective teachers. The universities, Amy was able to at least reach someone at all of the universities involved, I believe. So that brings me to the recommendations. TVSC has, and I know we could talk about this at length, but they have really tried to do what they could to make good recommendations about how to create more candidates for our classrooms in Kansas. So what they're saying is that based on the evaluation and the conversations that we've had, the licenses that we've issued, et cetera, we really feel like that we could continue to provide this special education paraprofessional pathway, the limited apprentice license program. We want to give some priority to allowing already licensed elementary teachers to become elementary teachers. When we first started, we had some secondary folks, believe it or not, who called the office and said, how do I get to be an elementary teacher? They really can't right now. There's no endorsement that you can take a test for to add elementary. So we think we've got some ideas on how we might be able to work that and would like to make that a priority for continued conversation. We also want to talk about alternative pathways, other options for bachelor degreed individuals to transition into teaching, to that piece about the elementary license. It typically was folks that teach either band or choir or PE, they said, I'd love to be an elementary teacher. Right now, we don't have that option, and we'd like to continue to explore that recommendation. So, this whole piece here is just to give you a little bit more detail of what we would like to do. We learned some things. We didn't set a good GPA in the beginning of when we were putting the pilot together. We really needed to clarify what we meant by 1 year of para experience, because what happened was people were calling and saying, well, I've been a para 10 years ago for a year. Does that count? The intention was they were current paraprofessionals serving kids in a special education classroom. So we had to work a little bit there. The support and supervision, the survey came back and said my support, my mentoring was what helped me be the most successful. So in spaces and places where that happened well, we had highly successful candidates. The responsibilities of the education agency, that piece right there. Make sure you assign a mentor, keep them in an appropriate assignment, try not to use them for anything any different. The university needs to provide a timely 2-year plan of study for completion. Talk about the coursework, and again, I mentioned that mentor, excuse me, and university sharing information and collaborative nature about those candidates. TVSC really wanted to take some time before we implement this fully to allow the universities to develop a program that was more unique. They took their current high incidence programs and gave it to these pilot candidates, right? I think there's some work that they could do to make it more efficient. When you're becoming teacher of record, you need some things sooner rather than later, and we didn't really make those adjustments at the university level. So we'd like to be able to think about how that coursework could change over time and be more effective for those teachers. Our hope is that we could have this available to candidates for next summer, that they might be able to enter and become teacher of record in the fall. We had a lot of conversation about what happens afterward. So do they go to the initial license? Do they need 2 more years of mentoring when they've already had 2 years of mentoring? So this is an area that I would like to rely on the Teacher Vacancy and Supply Committee to help us work out a little bit and make some really good recommendations. And then that candidate could add subject endorsements later on, right? If they're an elementary high incidence candidate, they could take tests to add secondary things. Remember, we can't go backward on the licensing, but we can add up, if you will. They get a real live teaching license when they're finished. It's the initial teaching license granted to traditional program completers. So we listed for you, since today is a receive item conversation only, we listed for you what the proposed motion would be. We'd like for you to recommend that we continue this opportunity for paraprofessionals, call it the limited apprentice license, allowing us, though, an opportunity to adjust the program of study for those candidates. We also ask that you give us a little bit of time to explore and pilot some other opportunities for bachelor's degreed individuals who are maybe at the secondary level, and try to get those already licensed teachers an elementary endorsement as well. And with all of that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, so we really have 2 programs we're talking about. One is the para to special ed, and the other is looking at an option of a program for somebody who's already teaching, but in the secondary level, to teach, to do a licensure program to get them into elementary, correct?
Yeah, you did. You also had the elementary pilot for any bachelor's degree candidate, right? The problem with that pilot, the numbers that I showed you early on, you only had 55 candidates in there. That would be tough. If you're an elementary person and you're expected to be teacher of record in all those subject areas, at the same time you're keeping that work-life balance, taking courses, et cetera, I think we can come up with something that's better there. But number 1 priority would be for like a secondary already licensed candidate to get that elementary endorsement added to their license.
Okay, so board members, questions? This is a receive item this month, and we'll vote on it next month. I believe that's correct. So questions? And Ma?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know some districts do this mentoring thing better than others. Do you guys check this out?
So I'm working with a university partner on the Professional Standards Board work. One of his priorities is we've got to get an evaluation piece out on our mentor programs. We've had that regulation for a 2-year mentor program long enough now that it is time to get some evaluative data and make really good criteria decisions on what good mentoring looks like.
Yeah.
Anytime you survey the field on how was your mentoring opportunity, your more successful candidates are the ones who have had that really good mentoring opportunity. And you,
Well, I think
yeah.
people ought to know which are the best districts to go to get mentoring and which ones maybe not so much. No, only other thing was, I think about a year ago, I'd ask you guys if this committee could look at shorter programs, because my daughter-in-law went through this transition to teaching, and it's just like this, trying to balance taking 9 hours teaching, you've never been in a classroom before. I don't know how they do it, but is there a shorter program than 30 hours that you could go through, and a different way maybe to assess them, like maybe peer review or something else that's shorter than what we currently have, a faster way to get into the classroom? And I don't think you guys have ever looked at that.
In talking with Susan, it's time to evaluate that program as well, because it has been in place so long. We run a lot of candidates through the restricted program, right? I think it probably is, to your point, time to come back and say, are we still in the same place we were? Are there some program adjustments that we could make that would lessen that, and then really strengthen that mentor piece on that?
Yeah, because there are a lot of qualified people out there I think could get in a lot faster if we find a streamlined program for them.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions on Mr. McNeese?
Yeah, that brings up a question of who's doing it? Where is it happening? What districts are being impacted? What are the universities? How do they feel about it? What are the numbers? I don't know what the numbers are.
So that was what was really powerful about Amy's review, because she contacted the universities, the co-ops, the special ed co-ops, and the school systems. To a person, they all said, please keep this as an opportunity for us. Anytime there's a special ed opening, people are learning, they've learned, and now I'm going to have this gap where there is no program for them, but they've learned that can be an option for a bachelor's degree candidate. So to your point about who's using it, anytime there's an opening, I think it's a first
Well,
place
the
that
numbers,
they go to.
like what districts are benefiting, what
Yeah.
universities are benefiting, and from this. Obviously, the kids are benefiting. When I say benefit, that are participating in this program and successful.
Yeah.
And what are the reasons that some candidates are not being successful?
I can provide you, I will, Mr. McNeese, the exact detail of which districts used it and how many they used. Some used more than one, down to systems that only used one, but I can give you that. And overall, I would tell you that the evaluation determined that provided there's good mentoring opportunities in place between the candidate, the university, and the LEA, those candidates are successful. Where that didn't happen, we saw some pockets of not success.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to clarify. So the limited apprentice license, so the para to teacher.
Yes.
So we had some people go through the program this summer, and then they will be in place this year.
Correct.
Still part of the pilot,
Yes.
correct?
The extension you all blessed, I think it was in May.
Right. So that is open this year for folks.
No, it ended, so they were able to take their coursework this summer, that's 6 to 9 hours, but we did not allow another cohort for the fall semester. Those 6 to 9 hours that took coursework this summer are teacher of record this fall. No new candidates this semester or next semester are being allowed into the opportunity.
I guess I'd ask why not.
I think, and this is what we told systems, at some point it needed to stop so that we could take this time to evaluate the effectiveness of it, make tweaks and adjustments to make it even better than it is. I think the things that we're recommending changes are going to be very important changes, and so that by next summer, we can pick it back up again. We're going to go 2 semesters without that opportunity.
Okay, I guess my question is, can we monitor? I mean, is that going to hurt? Special education, as we all know, is always a huge vacancy area, a huge need area. Can we continue to monitor to see? Because I personally, as a board member, wouldn't have a problem with that continuing to go forward as a pilot. I can't speak for my colleagues, and I won't. But I guess I'd like for us to continue to monitor, because I know, especially this year, oh my, the vacancies, potential vacancies we'll have. And I know, so the idea will be, by next summer, we'll have this new program ready to go.
Correct. And Madam Chair, I serve with the pleasure. If you want it to continue, I am absolutely willing to do whatever you all request.
Well, I guess maybe I'd like to, I'm guessing the universities, and I think there was, mainly 4 on there?
Yes, yeah, I guess my only concern might be, in the rearranging some program course offerings.
Right.
If I stop, I'm giving them more of an opportunity to do that while not continuing. So I guess that was
Right. Well, I just think, if there seems to be a huge outcry, I mean, of course, I represent the Sedgwick County area, as far as my state board district, and, I always know there's need in that area, and I think probably most of my colleagues would agree with that. I'd just ask if we can kind of keep an ear and an eye.
Absolutely.
And see if, see if there's some issues that pop up.
Would it be acceptable to you that if as this semester continues, I hear from districts that say, man, I wish we still had that opportunity, and that number grows, that I could say, perhaps January, if I can get a blessing from the board, we could, something along those lines.
To monitor it and see,
Okay,
because,
absolutely.
maybe that, I understand that universities need to kind of retool, but,
One
those
of
needs
the
are
pieces-
ever present.
Yeah, one of the pieces I know Susan has dealt with is when the semester ends and the progress reports are due from universities, that's a key to her to issue a license. That 6 to 9 hours requires a progress report, right? So if she was waiting on those and the system was waiting on those, there was some lag time there. So I'd like to tweak enough that we can figure out how not to have to do that, and so.
Understand.
Yep.
Jean Clifford.
I just wanted to say that in this interim period of time, I think it's important that we make sure people understand that this isn't the termination of it.
Correct.
That it will continue, because I think it might be a way to also attract people into being a para-sped right now, to offer, say, this might be an opportunity for you in the future. So we might be able to use that time for that purpose as well.
Grow candidates. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yep, great idea. Other questions for Michelle on either of these programs? Okay, so then in September, we'll have a recommendation to vote on.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much. Okay, Randy's got,
So I think about this a lot, and everyone's studied this issue on how do we grow the pool. If you look at young people thinking about what they want to do, or if you look at older people, it's, for the most part, teachers become a teacher for the same reason that ministers become ministers, or social workers, or they want to help people. Nurses, they want to help people. Now, you can get in a little bit, you love your craft, right, Sherry? I mean, you could love your music, or you could love your math, but there's a kid component to that goes along with it. So I think what we all ought to be thinking about is, where are those opportunities that you could capture people either early or in midlife, Pear is an example, that are exhibiting some characteristics that they really want to impact young people's lives and then transition them. So not that I'm trying to pilfer any one area or any other area, but if you think about if you think about childcare, these are people that obviously care about children, elementary or early childhood type kids. Oftentimes that pay is not very good, and they're in and out of the business. And if they had some kind of degree, you could maybe transition that type of group of people into a rewarding career like the pairs. And I just think we ought to think about those things. Where can we really enhance people? Steve Carlin brought para idea, and hey, they're gonna stay local, they're gonna stay at home. 4-Day Stay, Wichita State are just two of the examples that have really done well. And to have over 200 more special ed teachers because of that program is exactly what you want to do. You're encouraging people to take a career ladder step with people that obviously are somewhere mid-career and they're going to stay in their local school district. So to keep thinking about those things and pushing ourselves on how we can grow the profession with people that do show some tendency that they want to really reach out and help someone, but they don't know how the pathway to go do that. So.
Thank you, Randy. Okay, our next agenda item actually is the consent agenda. So, if we could have a motion to approve consent. Dina Horst. Second? Janet Wall. All in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstain? 8-0-1. Steve Roberts abstaining. Okay, we have the School for the Deaf professional agreement. Okay, and we're waiting for an interpreter, and she can connect at 3:20, you say? Yeah, why don't we, that's a good, let's look at board travel. So I'm moving you ahead here.
Zoom doesn't count, does it?
Huh?
Zoom doesn't count. I Zoomed with Africa and I was with Utah.
Okay, let's see. So, if you look, actually in your packet, you have the latest travel information, so take a look at that and see if you have any known things coming up. I'll give you a minute to find that. Okay, any additions as far as travel's concerned? I might draw your attention to the other document that's right behind this landscape view is the fiscal year 2021 budget allocations for salaries and travel expenses. That just for your information, because we just basically pretty much started this, correct, Peggy, this year. So that's the travel allocations. Obviously, this last year, we didn't have any trouble staying within travel budget because we've been home so much, but if you kind of take a look at the travel allocation, that information's there, and it's always a good idea to stay within our budget the best we can. We know we have responsibilities, but to also stay within our budget because our budgets are always tight. So any additional travel information to add? Jim Porter.
This is retrospective, but I had a Government Affairs Committee yesterday.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, do I have a motion to approve travel? Ann Maw, second. Ben Jones, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, 9-0. Thank you. Okay, for the School for the Deaf and the Blind Mark will be up here in just a minute. And he's going to go over, this is actually just the deaf, correct? Yeah. So we'll be going over this, and I don't know, maybe you need to take a stand-up stretch break. You can do that. Yeah. Okay, we are, at this point, this is item number 18, and we will be acting on the professional agreement for the Kansas School for the Deaf, NEA. We do have an interpreter online. We appreciate her being here. Thank you very much. And our presenter will be Mark Ferguson, and he will be going over the professional agreement, which is a 2-year agreement. And in your packets, this is, if you're wanting to look, board members, this is on page 143. So, Mr. Ferguson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And other adults coming to you straight from the kids' table at Thanksgiving, the folded card table in the other room. It's a pleasure to come by for a second helping of biscuits and gravy and turkey. I don't think you're going to have too many problems with the agreement as presented because on black and white print, there are minimal changes, but I thought I'd use it as an opportunity to just restate kind of the process because for any viewers and also to remind the board of the overall process because the board talks about, local control and local school districts and not very many people know unless the situation comes up that this board sits as the board and the authority for the School for the Deaf and School for the Blind, and so that's why this specific negotiated agreement is coming to you, so that's by statute. And that process starts in the spring when the parties identify topics for to go through the formal negotiation process. And the KNEA has a unit of instructors at the School for the Deaf. They designate their team, and the administration and the board designate their team, and we exchange letters identifying the various topics for negotiation. The board representative, Michelle, is not here, but she participated in that process. By statute, there was one change last year in the statute that the members of the team have to go through some formal training on professional negotiations. So all the members of the team did participate in some additional training, and we commenced on the formal negotiations. As this report includes an interpreter, so did any meetings with just the administration or just the KNEA team, and think about the fact that Zoom meetings are complicated enough, but when you add the interpreter and that communication piece, those were very productive meetings, but lasted a few hours on a few topics. After identifying the topics for negotiation, we divided those up into informal working groups. We had some of the issues could be accomplished by a memorandum of understanding, basically agreement of the parties, and then those that are mandatorily negotiable went through the formal process of exchanging the interest-based bargaining process of how we come to a resolution. The main departure from what local school districts go through is that by statute, the School for the Deaf, the compensation, the pay scale is by statute linked to the preceding school year for Olathe School District. So that takes the main, the hot air out of the room because that's always the main issue in professional negotiations. So while that is removed and makes things much smoother and don't have to worry about the salary schedule, that's adopted then and attached, and that's the same here. It also, in this case, allowed for a 2-year agreement because Olathe had a 2-year agreement in place, so they knew what the 2-year salary schedule was going to be. However, there were some other topics related to compensation that had to do with the supplemental pay, the supplemental contracts, and so it had been a while before since the parties talked about, what were the appropriate rate of pay and the categories, for example, readjustment of the number of assistant coaches or looking at that, and so that occurred as part of this this round of negotiations. There were also topics related to compensation, personal leave, being able to utilize sick leave at the time of retirement, basically getting a payout for unused sick leave. There were some issues related to dues being deducted via payroll for membership in the association. We had an issue related to the level of classification for an interpreter to be present during certain events, level 4, level 5 interpreter. There were some modifications to the evaluation instruments that were being used. There was some conversation around balancing out additional duties that teachers could sign up for voluntarily, and making sure that those were evenly distributed across the entire staff. And then there was significant discussion about how to support new teachers in terms of mentoring. Other topics, and not all of these were addressed in the formal negotiation, but there were some things that will be discussed over time and are on the horizon that maybe haven't come up before. Dress code and wearing apparel. There'll be a working group to discuss how they can, how that can be addressed in the workplace. While the policies exist, they may have gotten relaxed over time, and so some of that involves a PR piece and talking and educating, and so there was some concern over the dress code and how that might be, those existing policies might be implemented. So those are just to share with you kind of some of the topics that were discussed. In black and white print, however, the negotiated agreement, they're not, I'm happy to answer any specific questions about that, but the salary schedule is attached, does track the preceding year for Olathe, and then the second year of the contract will track the second year in Olathe, and there are other fairly minor changes, and some of those will be addressed through ongoing working groups.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I've got one question to start with. Ann Ma.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, I know some districts are negotiating COVID-related extra things we might need to think about this year. Did that come up?
That did not come up in any way in the formal negotiations.
Did they talk about how they might plan to address that, or we'll just handle it when it gets there, if it gets there?
Yes, that was outside the negotiations. I'm sure that's ongoing, and I understand we have a report from the schools, from both schools tomorrow, so I'm sure they'll update you, but it was not part of the formal negotiation process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Other questions for Mark? This is an action item today. We will be taking action on it, but other clarifying questions? Yeah, Mark?
And you mentioned action item. I neglected to state that typically what we do is make sure that the instructional staff has submitted that for vote, and it has been ratified by the KNEA prior to bringing it to you. So that was overwhelmingly approved by the members of the KNEA and School for the Deaf.
And just a reminder, Mark did update us last month on negotiations, so, but I think that was before they actually took their vote. So we will be voting today. Jim Porter?
Mark just answered my question.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Ben Jones?
I move that the Kansas State Board of Education adopt a professional agreement between the Kansas School for the Deaf, NEA, and the Kansas State Board of Education for the term August 1, 2020 to July 31st, 2022.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Dina Horst. Any further questions or comments? Okay, if not, motion's on the table in a second, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that looks like a 9-0 to me. Mark, thank you very much. We'd like to thank the folks on the KNEA for the School for the Deaf also. Appreciate your participation in this process, so thank you very much. And appreciate our interpreter being here with us a little early. Thank you very much. Okay, board members, next item, we are going to chairman's report and future agenda items and reports. First thing we're going to start with is a topic that we began to work on this morning, which is further conversation and action on the Navigating Change document updates, and also the document, the gating criteria document that Randy went through today. So Randy's going back to the podium and going to certainly
Answer any questions or
certainly any
clarifications that you might have.
clarifications, whether they be the individual, the document that just says updates, which is pretty much the funding remote and the grade bands, in addition of some of the appendices.
And the masking changes for the elementary students. And then, of course, the gating. Remember, this is all of this information from the very beginning, and will continue, are recommendations. None of this is mandated to any school district. They're recommendations to try to help local boards and communities make sense of some trying times.
So again, Randy, would you talk about the gating criteria was based on recommendations from what groups?
So we had, let's start with the Navigating Change hierarchy, if you would. So we had the implementation team. That's Corey Gibson, Shannon Ralph. We had Frank Harwood, Ashley Goss, and then some KSDE staff. They were joined by representatives of the University of Kansas KU Pediatrics medical system, Kansas Family Physicians, Kansas Pediatricians. And when you look at the gating criteria outside of schools for the absenteeism, that was heavily school discussed, how to count absenteeism. Most of the gating criteria was brought forward by the medical professionals, tweaked maybe a little bit by the school, or at least questioned by the school of how it would be operationalized. But this is medical advice by Kansas medical physicians back to you, back to you, and then also to school districts for guidance.
Janet Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of just, I guess, comments, and then I have one question. First of all, thank you so much, and I think this is amazing. I think this is something our superintendents and board members that I've talked with are desperately in need of, and they want. This will help them, I think, in how to handle it, no matter how they adopt it, how much they use it, you know, or which ways. But this gives them a guidance document. But also, I was simply also wanted to say that I am so impressed, and I'm so appreciative of all these health professionals. I don't know that we've ever worked this closely with health professionals. I mean, I know we have worked with them, but not this closely, you know, and to my memory, you know. And I just would like to, maybe we need to publicly thank them, each of these groups, because they have just gone above and beyond, and they are so, they've been so helpful. I served on one of the committees on Navigating Change, and there was a health professional leading it. So, because I was on the operations side, and so anyway, that's what I would like to suggest, that we give them a lot of kudos for all this. Now, here's my question. On the second page, the one about the gating criteria for buildings. Okay, now this is for buildings. Yeah, right. Okay.
Correct.
All right. My question is this: what if? I mean, this is a what if question. Maybe a couple of students and a teacher or something in one classroom are diagnosed. Do we have to shut the whole building, or could they just shut that classroom for 14 days or something? I don't know. And if that's in there, I didn't see it.
No, that is not in there, because that would be identifying who has the virus, where that person had been around, and then you're quarantining that cohort group for 14 days. This is speaking about general outbreak or possible illness in general. So that would still be applicable, and that's in the original guidelines, Janet.
Oh, I said, okay, then
Yes.
I apparently missed that.
So if, for example, let's use the Board of Education. If after today, it was, well, Randy, tested positive for COVID, then obviously I'm going to be quarantined, and then all of you would be quarantined for 14 days until you can be tested to see. So that's how that would work, and that's how that would work in a classroom.
So in other words, they don't have to close the whole building or the whole
Not
district?
necessarily. It depends on the spread or how much impact those students or teachers, that cohort group had within the building, Janet.
Thank you.
The other thing that's a little, well, let me speak to the physicians again, because I'm just amazed by them. And I think what we can do in September, let's just see if they can join us by Zoom. And we could all thank them. And KDHE, the epidemiologist and doctors there too. So, because they've just been so helpful. And Jim knows one of them well. It's from his hometown. So, yeah, I'm just impressed. On the ADA, so I want to be clear on this because this is easily confused, and I'll go over this with superintendents. And as always, you're welcome to join the 12:30 calls, you know, and be a part. So what Salina's going to do, Dina, is they're going to look back to last year's average daily attendance at Salina Central High School as an example. And that's going to be a number. And let's just say it's 90%. That is their baseline. In Twin Valley, Jim, it was 93, and that's their baseline. And from there, they're measuring away from that in 3% increments. Does that make sense? So when that average daily attendance over a week period in the Salina Central example drops below 87, they start to have conversations with their medical to make sure there's not something going on that's going to lead to a bigger outbreak. And the reason we did it that way, and I just think it was a lot of great discussion, is because if you examine suburban or high affluent counties where there's low poverty, their attendance rate's higher than in districts that have high poverty. And so if you put a standard like at 90% or 95, you're not regarding what their typical day is. You're either too low or too high, and that's why they really spent a lot of time on that gating requirement. And we'll have to go over it over and over, but that's really important. You know, Gene would know even at certain times of the year, because of populations, you may have an exodus or input because of how some populations travel too.
So Randy, on this gating criteria, one thing most of us, when we follow the COVID data that we see, we're used to seeing the community gating criteria, which is the 5, the 5.1 to 9.9, and so on. We're used to seeing that. But the really new piece is going to be this building gating criteria, which is based on average daily attendance, which those folks in education know as ADA. So that's really a new piece. And again, it isn't if one factor, it's not one piece, it's the preponderance of evidence.
One factor may start you to become concerned and have this conversation. So I said this, I jumped on a Zoom at noon with some superintendents. So in my spare time recently, which hasn't been a great deal, but my spare time, I've been reading or listening to audiobooks of General Eisenhower before he became president, and then reading after he became president. And you've heard me say this. Eisenhower spent a year and a half planning for the invasion of Normandy, and he had to negotiate Churchill and Stalin and all these factors, Montgomery, Patton, all these generals. And he said the minute we hit Omaha Beach, that plan was worthless. But what made us through is that we had a process by which we constantly evaluated that. If you put together the superintendent, the school board, your county health official, and the doctors, especially pediatricians if you happen to have them, but doctors, and that becomes your team, you then take the criteria and you just apply it every week. That process will lead you to great outcomes because it's going to move. Your community is going to move, and it's going to be good and not good and everything in between. And you'll develop a rhythm in that, and that's what we hope that happens. You're not just looking at a data point. You're looking at data along with the conversations with the people that know that community and also know the medical situation.
Jim McNeese?
Well, this might be a question for Dina and the High School Activities Association, but what impact does this have on them?
I have shared this with Bill Faflick and Keisha last night as the draft was coming together, and then I sent him, because we actually did some update. These are recommendations, so they would be Keisha can do nothing or anything or whatever their board would still want to do. This isn't dictating to Keisha anything. It is recommending some recommendations as it relates to schools and their activities, but that would be up to Keisha, Jim.
Okay, thank you.
Dina Horst?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions, and I'll ask my first one, I guess, kind of as a piggyback on what Jim was just asking. So a district can look at this also unless Keisha takes some sort of action as the no high-risk activities. They could say, well, we're going to go ahead and play football anyway.
Yes, so let me speak to that in general and also specific. If the school district was entirely in green and that team I just talked about was in agreement, you could be playing all fall sports with appropriate guidance. Once you went to yellow under these, you could play all fall sports with some safety precautions, with the exception of football, if you adhere to the guidance. And then once you got to orange and red, activities are done. Now that's the guidance, Dina. You're right. So districts could take it or not take it. What I would caution people, this is again guidance, but what you may have is, I'll come back to learning. We want to be in green, right? We all, I think Jerry would agree, teachers want to be in green, families want to be in green, kids want to, that's the best we can get. But we're not always going to be there. So if we are saying, the medical team is saying we need to be in orange or red, okay, but we're going to be in green for athletics. That's tough for me, because we're making decisions for families and kids that is not the best learning environment because of the virus, but we're making a different determination as it relates to activities. Does that make sense, Dina? Now, they can do that, because it's just recommendations, but I would just caution, so Randy's editorial, I'll just caution people in really taking a look at that, because if the virus is such that we're worried about the outbreak, and that's a local decision, then I think we ought to take a look at that one way or the other. I really want kids to be in school, and I'm worried. Kids that are behind, kids that are special needs, kids that need our help have been out of school since mid-March in many cases. And so I'll get off that soapbox for a second, Dina, but it's all recommendations.
Well, and if we're talking about green, yellow, orange, red as far as gating criteria, and we're just talking about absenteeism, as we get closer to the flu season, that will also enter in. So are these color gating criteria based on COVID or on all absentees?
It's based on all absenteeism, because for young kids in particular, they're generally asymptomatic. So they don't exhibit the symptoms of COVID while they may have them. So what the medical said, look at all absenteeism related to illness being out. Now, that doesn't mean when you get to flu season, they may want to adjust that. But right now, that's their recommendation. Look at all illness.
Okay. And then the question kind of that I asked this morning that still is kind of confusing to me. If you can say, we are, as a community, we as a building are really green, but because of concerns that our staff has, we are still doing hybrid. Not because what their community is saying, but because, or what their the gating criteria is, but because of a choice that they've made. So if I'm looking at the yellow, for example, on the first page, but I really could be doing green because of what my gating criteria says. Which one am I supposed to be going with?
Whatever your local people make the decision to do.
Okay.
Now, if someone calls, we would look at the data and say, we recommend you to be in green. But that decision's still made locally. That's just a recommendation based upon the evidence. You're going to have to look at that. We should aspire, though, to be in green. That's our aspiration. We're not going to be there all the time in every school district, but that's our aspiration. But that's why they're local decisions, Tina. They're local decisions.
Well, that's kind of what I want to clarify, so thank you.
Randy, this kind of goes back to previous. So if districts are having trouble, I mean, districts also can always contact, as long as they're a member of the Kansas Association of School Boards,
Yes.
to get their advice as far as how to implement some of this information.
Yes. KNEA, teachers can contact KNEA. And remember that the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, 3 times a week right now, I believe, or multiple times a week, have conference calls with the county health people. So again, if I'm superintendent, I'm probably not going to know all the details of this, but my county health officer with KDHE should, and my local physician should. And so over time, I'll get to know it a lot better as we work as a team. But yes, there are a lot of other organizations that can give assistance too.
Ann Ma?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randy, are we hearing anything at all about whether or not the HE is going to issue an opinion on EO 59, 2059?
Ann's talking about the executive order to wear a mask, 2059. What I know is he gave an interview with the Associated Press that said he believed counties could override it, and he actually, I think, said, at least it was reported, that maybe it was a question of the constitutionality. I know that he asked Mark and Scott and other agencies if they wanted to weigh in on that. But Mark, I would turn to you because I have not seen anything in writing. So I don't know anything past that.
It's still in the works, and I reached out to the Deputy Attorney General in anticipation of this meeting, just asking if they were at liberty to disclose the timeline, and I didn't hear anything back.
Well, I mean, it's getting ridiculous. The thing's been out for a month. Make a decision, because this is one of the things that schools are really torn about, like, do I believe this, do I believe that, Until he puts something in writing, I guess the governor stands.
Well, and remember this, that the Attorney General's opinion is an Attorney General's opinion. Really, now I'm going to look at Mark. But generally, until there's case law that settles it, you probably could still have attorneys disagreeing on that.
I do know, I got some calls yesterday. There is a county in my area that has, the county commission has declared, assumes that they have superseded the governors and are not requiring masks for schools. Whether or not that's legal, I don't know, but it's fact.
Can I speak to that? Because that's certainly their, I mean, they can do that if it's not challenged. Our guidance would be that students 3 and above, if they're in a K-12 building, and staff wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands as often as possible, sanitize. What we tend to find, I'll look back here at Sherry, is that in the early decisions about counties doing that, teachers become very uncomfortable. I'm just generalizing, because you start to have, wow, is that as safe an environment as possible? So these are tough decisions that counties and school districts are making, and they're not without trade-offs, whatever you make. So we're here to give guidance, and that county can, or school district can do whatever they feel is in their best interest.
Okay, other questions for Randy? Okay.
Did I mention this is guidance only?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, just want to make sure I got that in.
Guidance, yep, Janet.
And I would say this, sorry, Janet. The reason for that is also because you don't really have any statutory authority to tell school districts on medical what to do, but you can give guidance. So you're staying within your lane to do that. I think some people would say, just tell them. You really don't have, you have authority over accreditation and licensure and some things that Mark has outlined. So I'm sorry, Jan.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just strictly for information purposes only, or clarification. We will vote on this tomorrow, correct?
No, today.
Today.
So we're going to vote on it, I thought we were going to do it tomorrow. Okay, we're going to vote on it, but once again, it's not mandatory, it's guidance.
You're accepting the recommendations of the Navigating Change Group, which includes the doctors, to give guidance to school districts, or not.
Jim McNeese?
Well, following up on Janet's comments, I'd go ahead and move that we accept the updates to the Navigating Change document reflecting the changes and the new information since the board approval on July 15th.
Second, Ben Jones. Any further discussion? And again, this is accepting the updates of this guidance
Correct.
document. Anything? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, 9-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Randy, you will be following up with the superintendents on Thursday.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I would welcome anyone that would like to jump in and then just go right to the chat room and start answering questions. That'd be extremely helpful, as I'm sure there may be few. We have about 350 private and public school systems, and they all have, different views, as Mr. Porter pointed out.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Okay, we're going to continue under the chairman's reports. First of all, Board Attorney Mark, anything additional? You can come to the podium if you.
I was off to the side, that I did reach out to the Attorney General's office to find out where they were in that process. I know they were soliciting input from a variety of sources and agencies, and so I haven't heard anything back. So I'm sure that it's in the works. I don't have any other specific updates other than we did provide some input in response to the invitation to provide point of view for the Attorney General to consider.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, requests for future agenda items. Jean Clifford.
I just had a couple of thoughts. One, I was wondering if there would be any utility to having maybe a brief look at each of our meetings of the statewide concerns, because I know I hear a lot about the ones that are out in western Kansas, but I might not be quite as aware of those that are in maybe more the urban areas or different areas of Kansas. And it would be nice to have like a broader picture of what's going on maybe in the state or even in the region, especially related to COVID, so that I think we can make better decisions. So that was one thing that I thought might be useful to us in the next few meetings or until we kind of get a handle on this. And the other thing is there any way to sort of have a more formalized sort of lessons learned as we get into the school year of things districts did or and maybe had success or not success with, so that other districts would be able to take that into account and what they plan to do. Because, you know, we have practically, 1,200 pages of great guidance, but it's a little, I'm sure, bewildering to figure out, you know, which is going to work. And if somebody didn't have success with something, it'd be helpful to know.
That could kind of dovetail in with kind of what I asked Brad for this morning. So, yeah.
We were gonna bring some school districts today, but Brad had about 20 minutes, and so we thought, we talked about it. So we will do that, and I think that's great. We start to learn and unlearn from those things that are working. There's so many things to consider when school boards and superintendents and teachers and principals are putting these plans together. And you can get locked into looking at something just one way, right? We need to run it this way because of X, which makes lots of decisions, or good decisions, until you look at it another way and you go, oh, but we did that and then we had this problem. That's a great idea, Gene.
Steve Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to actually probably sanitize my hands and then hand out some pictures for a very brief discussion.
Is this discussion or a request for a future agenda?
Request for a future agenda item. I don't want anybody to get COVID. I don't think I'm contagious. I'll use hands in test case. One of my favorite things. Thanks a lot. You're my second favorite. You just take one. So, I've had a life change, and my personal situation's changed, and so, person that I'm seeing now went through some old pictures of mine, and she wondered why I quit teaching. Well, it kind of looks that way, doesn't it?
You look a little
Oh, wait a minute,
younger
that's
than-
somebody else's choice too.
Yeah. Here's one for you guys. So, these are from either 1999 or 2000. This would be from Lutheran High School. And I ran the math department there for about a year. But they weren't able to keep me. This is on the Missouri side. This is nothing against our great state of Kansas. We're dealing with DESE on the Missouri side. Parochial school, Lutheran. Kansas City Lutheran High School. I ran the math department. I ran it pretty well. They were happy with it. But I wasn't licensed, so they couldn't keep me. And that's one of the things that put me on this path. That why can't we welcome people who can do the job well? So my request for a future agenda item is to get a license. I want to request a license for my fellow board members. And if it has to be an initial license, because that's the procedure, Randy and I have talked about this extensively. If it has to be a 6th initial 2-year license, because I've had 5 of them, then so be it. But I have a lot of teaching experience, and I've dedicated my life to education to try to make it better. And respectfully, I'd like to have a license. And not one that says initial, because I have at least 20 years of experience. So respectfully, that's my request for a future agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Dina Horst?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions, in a sense, I guess, that I'd like to have addressed, and maybe they can be combined into one type thing. But first off, I wondered, I've heard people say we're not teaching on, we're not online, we're not virtual, we're remote. So I'd like to know what the difference is. And so that I can, when people talk to me about us being online or being virtual or remote, why are we? I can maybe tell them why there's a difference. And also, when we were talking, when Kathy was talking earlier about best practices, it dawned on me we could do a virtual travel, in a sense, to that school district by having either Zoom or, I know the way that we deal with similar type things with our Teacher of the Year candidates, we actually go out and video them, and perhaps we could do something similar for this, and it could be used then as an idea for other districts in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dina. So kind of, it's virtual, online, and remote. It's probably those three, really. And there is a difference, so.
And we're happy to do that, and we should, because that's easily confused. You can go to the updated document right now, and there are some fact sheets about that would get you in preparation for our discussion next month on it.
Jim McNeese?
Well, I'm going to piggyback on Dina's request and add to it that I would like to know more clearly who has access and who doesn't. It's an access and equity issue. You know, broadband capacity. There are inner city areas that have limited access for multiple reasons, as well as rural areas that have limited access for multiple reasons. Why aren't we doing something about it? We know, but first of all, and I was on a committee last year with the legislature that basically inventoried the entire state, and they had very good information. And we need to have that information because people talk about it, but are we going to do anything about it? You know, so as we go into this next year and we're getting funds from the federal government and we're getting supports from this group or that group, but you know, why don't we have access in these areas that are deficient?
Jim, one of the things that the governor and the finance council just agreed to was $60 million to go to broadband services, and 10 million of that 60 million is earmarked for for people that are in poverty to get service. So I know Dale may know more details of it than that, but I know that just passed in the last couple of days, right, Dale?
Well, it's still, and that's good to hear. I would go one step further and say I want to see results. I don't want to make the good guys get gooder and the bad guy, and those without left out. Too easy sometimes. So I guess the question still remains: who is not being provided service or access? And it could be because of the broadband, but it could be because of a lack of a machine to work with it. You know, and the support in the home as well. You know, how do we do that? You know, but the bigger thing is, how do we get results?
It might be interesting to kind of take a look at that, because that data should be available, that you sat on that committee.
Yes.
And to take a look at that and then kind of have some conversations. That might be
And everything went away
interesting.
after the legislature, you know, got real focused that coronavirus had all kind of passed away. So maybe we should, you know, get that back and.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Ann Ma.
Thank you. Just to follow up on what Jim was saying, I mean, we have all it's getting pretty close now because all the recommendations have to be into the state by Friday, but every county got Spark money to spend and decide how they were going to divide that up. And we as board members had a real chance to get out there and advocate with our counties to send some of that money to schools because they were all over the board. Some did way better than others. I know I only got to listen in on ours, got some information about that because my husband was on the committee. Sometimes it was hard, to get information, but the people that were making those decisions didn't necessarily know much about education. So was really trying to advocate for that, and they wound up giving, in Shawnee County, a pretty good chunk to the schools. But a lot of that's going to go to internet, and that's what made me think of it, because that's a huge expense for Wichita and Topeka and all the other urban centers. And so that Spark money was a real chance to fix that problem. That's what we could do. Go get that money.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify one thing. I kind of said good guys. I meant those who are wealthy or have status. That because you don't have money doesn't mean you're not a good guy.
Okay, I didn't get committee reports. I don't know that we have too many. We may have a few. Ben, you said you had one.
Yeah, Madam Chair. I just want to let the board know, on behalf of the Kansas Foundation for Agriculture in the Classroom, that they recognized and announced the 2021 Janet Sims Memorial Teacher of the Year. This is somebody who uses agriculture teaching standards, and went to Casey Lockyer, a kindergarten teacher at Country View Elementary in Winfield this year, and she was honored with that. And there were other honorable mentions, but she gets a full trip to the National Ag in the Classroom Convention in Des Moines next year. A pretty good, and she becomes a nominee, and she also receives a pretty good stipend as part of that memorial. And there were other honorees, and you can go to the KFAC page for that, other teachers from around the state. But I just wanted to share that information because I know there's one board member 2 chairs down from me now, which is weird. I'm not used to being on this side of the table. That would be very proud of the work going on. So I appreciate the board, and congratulations to Casey Lockyer.
Thank you. Other committee reports? Real quickly, School Mental Health Advisory Council. We are in subcommittees. I mentioned this last month. We'll give you a little update. We're in subcommittees working on the bullying, Blue Ribbon Bullying Task Force recommendations. And we are making some pretty good progress. We will have a draft document ready for the state board. I would guess it will be December, but we're working and moving forward on that. So don't have any specifics, final things yet, but that's what we're spending a lot of time working on right now. We're also been sharing some information on social emotional supports as far as kids going back to school. There's some pretty good documents. There's an organization called CASTLE, and it's an acronym like everything else is, but there's an organization, and they have some great documents they're a great organization that helps with social and emotional supports. And they have some great documents that I'm sure Myron Melton would share with us if the board is interested in some of that information. So that's kind of my update for committee reports. Anybody else? Okay. We were going to have an informal discussion tomorrow with the Kansas Teacher of the Year team. Yeah, in September, thank you. I was just looking at this and I'm thinking, no, that wasn't tomorrow, it's September. But since a lot of those districts are now starting, our meeting is right after Labor Day next month. And since a lot of those schools are starting right after Labor Day, we didn't want to pull them out to meet with us in September. So we're probably looking at October to bring the team in to visit with us then. So just so you kind of know what's going on. We typically have that then, but we'll probably make an adjustment. We still do right now have plans for a joint meeting with the Kansas Board of Regents in the morning of September 9th. We're gonna kind of work on that. That may or may not happen in September, and if it does, it may or may not be a Zoom. So we're kind of working on details, so just know that we'll have additional information coming out on that. We do have a small committees meeting tomorrow on Zoom, so we'll have some more information on that. Okay, all right. I think that's it for the good of the order today. Dale, do you have something you'd like to share?
Respond to Professor McNeese's question. In cooperation with the Governor's Tax Council, we're surveying school districts now and to ask how many students you have that don't have access to the network, to the internet. And it'll be kind of interesting. Nothing to do with money. How many don't have access to the internet? So we'll have that. So anyway, it might fit.
Thanks, Dale. Appreciate it. Okay, tomorrow, we've already done travel. We'll be back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And we will be listening to the reopening plans for the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. So John and Luann will both be here and go over with us what their reopening plans are. And then we will vote on those. Also, then we're going to have a larger bulk of the morning will be spent on high school graduation requirements and post-secondary credentialing kinds of things. So that'll be kind of more of a discussion kind of a format than Randy will kind of help lead that, and I think maybe Brad will be involved in that too. So that'll be a little bit more of informal conversation as far as moving forward, particularly thinking about the qualified admission piece as far as the Board of Regents and what adjustments do we potentially need to make. Okay, that being said, I am going to recess the meeting today and looking at the clock thinking, okay.
You've done good.
All right, we got out a little early. We're in good shape. Those of you that have to get on your way home have got good time to do that. So we'll see you all tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.